Good evening and welcome to the Gold Goats and Guns Hour here on YouTube and Periscope, live streaming through Restream. I am Tom Luongo and I hope everybody is having a great evening. I have some stuff I want to talk about today. I've got a blog post up on my blog over at goldgoatsandguns.com that I think is quite instructive and quite important. I want to talk about the upcoming Trump and Putin summit that's going to take place in Helsinki. We're going to talk about that, and we'll probably open up the Q&A in about 20 minutes or so. So if you're new to this or you're watching this on the replay, you can subscribe here. I would appreciate it if you would subscribe to the YouTube channel. That would be great. And then make sure you click notifications and find out when I'm going to go live next. I usually do Monday nights at 8, Friday nights at 9, and various times during the week around noon o'clock or so. Maybe like on a Sunday and maybe on. All right, so let's get started, shall we? There's a report out from Eliza Magnier that the part of the agreement that's already been put in place for this summit between Putin and Trump regards Syria, and it regards the border crossing at Al Tanf, where we have a major military installation, and Al Tanf is right at the border crossing between where the borders of Jordan, Iraq, Syria come together. And good evening, troops. How are you? And that enclave, that base, has also been a training ground for us to prep more insurgents to fight against the Assad regime, among other things. So, according to Magnier, it's already been effectively brokered that Trump wants to pull out of Al Tanf. He wants to start bringing our troops home from Syria, because with ISIS, for the most part, wiped out, it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, for him to continue to justify our troops being there. And so it's one of those things that, for me, this is the signal that I needed. Well, I didn't need. I already had some other inkling that this is the beginning of what I think is the putting together what I've been talking about as the grand bargain in the Middle East for over a year now. I know you guys, we've talked about this in the past. Talked about, I've been writing about this since last May, that since Trump first went to Saudi Arabia and read all the Arabs, the Riot Act about sponsoring terrorism, that was his way of saying, look, no, this is all going to change. It's all going to change very, very radically. And so over the course of time. And there's been some twists and turns along the way. Mohammed bin Salman, the leader in Saudi Arabia, I think misinterpreted that statement as to, how far Trump's support of Saudi Arabia would go, which is why he launched a political and economic blockade of Qatar last year in order to try and gain control of the Gulf Cooperation Council and all this other stuff going on. But in the end, over the course of this past year, a little over a year, since Trump visited Saudi Arabia, Israel, and Italy as his first foreign trip, if you remember, meeting with the leaders of the three major religions in the world, or at least in the West, that it's, to me, this has always been the opportunity. This has always been the plan. And The problem, of course, was that there's nobody within the American government that actually wants this. The Israelis, I don't think, want this to take place. At least, I don't think Bibi Netanyahu wants it. I think he's been working overtime. He and his defense secretary, Avigdor Lieberman, have been working overtime to try and make this, try and draw out the situation in Syria as long as possible. And I think in order to try and bleed Iran as much as possible by forcing them to stay in, and Russia to stay in Syria, in order to try and affect destabilization and regime change in Iran and fatigue on the Russian side in order to broker a deal that's to their benefit. It hasn't worked, and I don't think it's going to work. I think that this summit coming up between Trump and Putin is going to put a period on the end of this policy of regime change in Syria, which is now off the table. So, all right. And if Magnier is correct, and I think he is, so don't get me wrong, I think that this is exactly what's been in the cards now for a while. If you look at what's happening in Syria right now, the Tiger forces of the Syrian Arab Army are wiping out the resistance in Daraa, south of Damascus. And that will probably be over. That campaign will probably be over, if not effectively over, by the time Trump and Putin meet in Helsinki in 10 days. And that was only going to happen as quickly as it has if the United States withdrew its support of Israel, giving its support to ISIS and Al-Qaeda linked forces in that region. And I think that Putin refusing to give the Syrian army S-300 missile defense systems was the key to Netanyahu finally climbing down off of his high horse. And that was the deal that was brokered when he was in Moscow for Victory Over Europe Day back in May. Like, look, we're going to take care of this. We can take care of this. And you're going to have to stand down. You'll note that since the major strike by the Israelis and the Americans back in response to the false flag chemical weapons attack, that back in April, that it's been pretty quiet since then. And I think that quietness is very telling. And so the next thing now is for Trump, on the heels of his win diplomatically with North Korea, now it's time to start brokering everything else. Now, I'm going to stop for a second, and I'm going to respond to some of the comments that have happened so far, because RB Tools has got a couple of interesting comments that I want to respond to. So I'm going to read them off, and then we'll get back to the narrative. So, one, he says that does anybody feel that the Trump-Putin summit might do nothing more than further cement the different visions of the two powers? I'm hoping for the best, but ready for the worst. His next comment is that Trump is beholden to the Israelis and Sheldon Adelson. All right. I do not feel that I actually feel that the summit is going to be quite important. And then, two, I also do think that Trump has been heavily influenced by the Israeli lobby here in the United States. I think he is, he has, I think, paid back Sheldon Adelson. I don't know that he's continuing to have to pay that back. And I think that that's one of those things where the amount of influence that people have behind the scenes over other people, other potential other politicians, I think that's overstated. I really do. I think he's given them much of what they wanted, and now they're going to have to deal with and trust him to come up with whatever their final, whatever the the final bargain is. I use the term final solution. And then since the South, to me, looks like it's going to be, for the most part, taken care of, right? Daraa is going to be, the Syrians are going to take back to the borders, 2011 borders, up to the edges of the Golan Heights. I don't think the Golan Heights are going back to Syria, ever. Matter of fact, I think that that's one of the things that's been negotiated away already, all right? And it's all over but the crying. Trump wants to, removing the troops from Al-Tanf is the most important first step, because that then does away with the threat of an insurgency from along the entire Jordanian border is now safe. The whole interior of the country is now safe. And now you've only got to deal with the north up in Idlib, and then as well as the northern former PKK canton at Afrin over to Manbij, which is Turks, and then everything east of the Euphrates River. Part of what Magnier is also saying is that the United States is preparing to pull out of their positions at Deir ez-Zor. I saw reports earlier in the week of the Kurds taking over Raqqa, which, if they're in negotiations with Damascus, eventually that's going to fall back under Damascus control as well. The last question from the gallery so far is what happens in the north when Assad wants the rest of his country back? Well, that's the very interesting part. I don't think that that's going to be much of a problem whatsoever, to be honest. I really do think that that Turkey is going to do whatever it is that Putin tells him to do at this point. I really do. I'm having a problem. It looks like I'm having a problem with the chat via Restream tonight. I don't know if I'm getting any I'm not getting anything from Periscope. So if you all are texting or are commenting on Periscope, I'm not seeing them. But I'm also seeing Restream's chat server continually having to reconnect. So I'm not sure what's going on. So you might want to venture forth from Periscope over to YouTube if you want to be a part of the conversation. I would rather everybody be on one platform, to be honest with you. Okay, so if I haven't responded to you, it's not because I'm ignoring you. I'm only seeing the comments from you. So once Al-Tanf is no longer a point of contention with the Syrian army, and the Russians have to game plan and prepare for a potential what's the word I'm looking for? Potential counterattack, towards Palmyra, as always. Okay, well, that's good. Thank you, JJ, for letting me know at least that there's something going on. And so I don't think that it's going to be much of an issue at all to get. So once Al-Tanf is taken care of, and there's no potential for a counterattack. Sorry, I almost lost my thought. That makes it a lot easier for the Russians and the Syrian army to start working on the next front, which in this case would be Idlib, and then getting the Turks to move back across the border won't be hard once they're comfortable with there no longer being the Kurds right on their border. That'll have to be brokered away. And then if Magnier is also right that Deir ez-Zor is the American pullout of Deir ez-Zor by the end of this year is on the table, then it's all on. Then the whole grand bargain in the Middle East that I've been talking about for over a year is on. It's happening. It's right in front of us. I'm going to be on with Halsey tomorrow night, and I'm sure he and I are going to talk about this at length. We'll get the Israeli perspective on all. User 13 pipes up and says, look, Adelson's becoming toxic and he'll be cut loose just like any other donor. Assad can simply not discuss the Golan for this go around and deal with taking that territory back once Syria is stable, if ever, to be honest with you. I think that at this point, Assad effectively giving up the Golan Heights at this point, if he can get the rest of the country back, with a Russian guarantee that he's never going to be regime changed and Syria is never going to be attacked again by the Americans et al., I think he'll take that as a win. I think the Golan Heights will forever be a de facto. It will be a de facto settled issue, if not in treaty, then at least in fact. That'll be fine. But the grand bargain, as I've talked about before, what is the grand bargain? I know some of you have heard this before, but I have to remind everybody who's maybe new. The grand bargain is that the United States becomes the guarantor of the behavior of Israel and Saudi Arabia and buffs them up to the point where they are their own effective threat against, they can hold their own, while at the same time the Russians become the guarantor of Iran's behavior and Hezbollah's behavior and Hamas. Right? That's ultimately the grand bargain. And that grand bargain means that the Russians will stay in Syria indefinitely, effectively acting as a stabilization unit there. So we'll see. User 13 saying Assad doesn't seem like he's a short-term thinker. The Syrians have never said that they will cede that territory. It's possible. I mean, I'm not ruling it out. I'm just saying that at this point in time, I don't think the settling the Golan Heights is on anybody's priority list at this point. And then going one step further, RB Tools, yes, the grand bargain is about the Russians guaranteeing that the Iranians will leave Syria and go home, which the Iranians want to do anyway. But that's, I think, the way Trump is able to declare victory and get out of Syria. So Thordoom pipes up and asks, says, with Tom, the guarantee means nothing. It will change with the next Jesus in charge, of course. So I don't think the Syrians will ever give up on the Golan. Sure. But I think that you have to understand, Thordoom, that I also think that we're on the downside of the Americans' ability to project power in the region. And so Israel doesn't have the ability to project power in the region if the Americans aren't there to do their bidding. And if we leave Central Asia and we end the Brzezinski doctrine of chaos in Central Asia, and we end and we effectively cede Central Asia as a geopolitical chessboard for our benefit and everybody else's loss, if that policy fundamentally changes, and I think that's what I mean by the grand bargain. This sets up the grand bargain that we're going to walk away from this region ultimately, I think. And if that's the case, then at some point in the future, whatever happens. And if the guarantee is only good for 10 years, well, it's good for 10 years. By then, everything will have changed. The political dynamic in Europe will have changed. The political dynamic here in the United States. I mean, 10 years from now, we could be looking at an internal civil war here in the United States that, leaves Israel out to hang. Then what? Okay? But then what? But for this next, 5, 7, 8 year period, right? Getting everybody to calm literally to calm the hell down and start looking at things start looking at opportunities to trade and interact with each other civilly. I think is the bottom line here. Yeah, pieces never, okay, RB Tools, pieces never purchased is only ever leased, such as the state of things, of course. And with a region with that much oil, but again, at the end of the day, remember also that the chessboard's going to change in a fundamental way over the course of these next 5 to 10 years. The United States is not going to be the dominant world's reserve currency of the world. It's not going to be the dominant economy in the world. By 2030, it's going to be China. If it's not all, I mean, it's just a matter of the shift occurring. How we get there is going to be the interesting part. How we get there is going to be what we're going to chronicle, what we're going to talk about. And, we're going to chat here every, couple times a week about while we chronicle all this. But I hate to sound, vaguely communist about this or vaguely Marxist about this, but history's already written. It's already there. We can already see it coming. WDM pipes up as Syria is yesterday's news. Yes, you are right. We have no long-term or medium-term security interest there, and it should be used to set the Russians against the Chinese. Good luck with that. Not going to happen. Yeah, I mean, I agree with everybody who's saying that effectively this whole Syrian policy has backfired badly in Israel. You're right. It's backfired on Turkey, too. It's backfired in the United States. I'm telling you, I mean, the day Putin moved into Syria was the day the American empire met its match. Everything else is now just, it's just, all that, it's just, we're just waiting for the crying. It's all over but the crying. Will they address our regime change in Iran? Good evening, Bruce Alexi. How are you? I don't think I've seen you here before. Or if you have been here before, I don't think you've commented. So, good evening. Yes, it will be on the table. People will they will talk about it. I think that part of the grand bargain in the Middle East is that if Iran is willing to go home, going to leave Syria, and I unfortunately think also stop supporting the Houthis in Yemen, which is a war that was picked by the odious Saudi Arabians. It's not a war I agree with, and but I can see Yemen being sacrificed on the altar of geopolitics and realpolitik in order to get this done. The regime change in Iran mantra, I don't know that it works. Yeah, with Russians selling their military equipment like never before because they're 1 to 2 generations ahead on missile systems and electronic warfare. Kind of good. Kind of good. I've said many times, and I'll continue to say it, I don't think it's possible for the regime change narrative to work. The whole regime change plan that they have, I don't think it's going to work. I think Giuliani going to the MEK rally and speaking how we're going to be having this conversation in Tehran in 6 months. John Bolton said this 2 years ago. It's insane. Okay, we're talking about it's this insane fantasy of neocon dead enders that have never been right about anything and are now yesterday's news. They are now openly wanting to rejoin the Democratic Party where they came from in the first place. It's good. They've ripped the mask off. They're no longer quote unquote conservatives. Great, thank you. Freaking Trotsky assholes, go home. RB Tools, how do you think the world will remember Putin? Am I wrong to think that he is the most competent leader in the world today? You are not wrong. The world will remember Putin as the greatest statesman of the 21st century. Putin, I think honestly that this summit begins the process of Putin, Trump, and Xi Jinping remaking the world. This thing might as well be put into this thing might as well be taking place in Yalta. The more I think about it, the more I really believe that this is going to look a lot like Yalta. So Thordu makes a very good point. It's a subtle point that most people don't understand, which is that Iran needs to be able to continue to supply Hezbollah to defy Israel, keep them out of Lebanon. They do not want to actually militarily be in Syria. Okay? And when Trump and on behalf of Netanyahu and Adelson and the rest of AIPAC calls Iran the greatest state sponsor of terrorism in the world, that's what he's talking about. Because Hezbollah, which is now effectively the Lebanese government, is considered to them to be a terrorist organization because they want regime change in Lebanon as well. He does have a mountain to climb at home. So RB Tools is saying, I hope you're right, Tom. Generally am. But I'll bust my hand, pat myself in the back. All kidding aside, he does have a mountain to climb. He does have a lot of people within his government that want to be, who will do everything they can to scuttle this. The Brits are out embarrassing themselves again with another Novichok poisoning. I mean, if you don't think that MI6 and MI5 are now crapping their boots, because it is pretty obvious to everybody who matters that they were the ones, along with the DNC, that created the vector of all of the crap to try and frame Trump for being a Russian stooge, which is all nonsense. So when you really put it all together, it's the Brits who are in serious trouble. And I think Trump wants to go to Britain. I think the deep state within Britain doesn't want him there because they know exactly what's going to happen. And it's kind of fascinating, actually, to think about what's coming next in our special relationship with Britain. I think our relationship with both Britain and Germany is going to change tremendously next, 6 months to a year. It'll be really, really interesting. Trump is his own worst enemy at home. If he slashes and burns, his base would support him. At this point, no one would blame him for a Saturday Night Massacre. I know, but maybe that's not his style. Maybe that's not really what he wants to do at this point. Maybe he really doesn't feel that he can do that, or that he should do that. That there's still other options. The guy whom he may help do exactly that, user 13, is AMLO in Mexico. Yep. Thordoom brings up that Hezbollah is now stronger than ever, politically and militarily. They have all of they're on the right side of the issue in Syria, having defended Syria and defended all manner of Syrians from this insane policy. So yeah, this whole thing has backfired really badly on Israel and the U.S. and the Saudis. It really has, and I don't see it ending well for any. I really don't. To me, it's the whole thing just is going to lay out very badly in the end. And at this point, I am firmly convinced that Trump is looking at this as an opportunity to say, all right, that's enough. We're done. Right? I've given you guys all the rope to hang yourselves. In a sense, you guys remember last year when he went back and doubled down in Afghanistan. I said then that I thought he made a deal with the neocons to stay in power because they were about to impeach him. I thought they were really about to impeach him at that point. that he made a deal with them that they would be in charge of foreign policy and he would be allowed to tinker at the edges of domestic policy. And for the most part, that's what happened. And then they didn't even give him any of the domestic policy stuff that he wanted. They fought him tooth and nail on Obamacare. They fought him tooth and nail on the wall, DACA, tax cuts, all of it, right? And I think that point is when he finally started to go on the offensive. He finally realized that there's no making any of these people happy. And he's just going to say, fine, this is what you want. We'll run with that policy. I'll support it until it becomes a liability. And then I'm not. I think we're at that moment where it's no longer a liability. And I think that the diplomatic back channels between him and Jinping and the Russians working the North Koreans and the South Koreans and the North Koreans talking, I think that actually opened everything up for him. You really have to think about what's happened here. North Korea is very important from the perspective of giving Trump the ammunition he needs to start going on the offensive at home on foreign policy, which is great. So, but it's been touch and go. And it's not been easy to watch happen. And you know, we had the discussion yesterday about QAnon and all this trusting the plan and the 40, and you know that I've rejected the whole 40 chess club thing from the beginning. And to me, this thing is laying out in such a way that it just looks to me like Trump is empowered right now. He just looks like he's just going for it. And he's telling people, you know, he's doing everything right now to try and really make a significant change to the post-World War II institutional order. And I think it starts with NATO. I think next week he goes into NATO and says, we're changing the mission of NATO. If you guys want to continue your anti-Russian stance on NATO, that's fine, but you're paying for it because we're not. I'm going to sit down with Putin in 4 days. I already have a plan for peace in the Middle East, and I already have some ideas. We already have ideas on the table about how we can deal with Ukraine. Now, you guys need to wake up. If you want to continue to play this game and you want to continue to run to do things this way, you're free to do so. Have a great time. You're paying for it because I'm not. Yeah, I mean, you guys all the comments that are coming through right now are fantastic, and I'm not going to cover each and every one of them, but they're all really good. I agree with most of them. Just FYI. So really do believe that we're close to the beginnings of the grand bargain. This is like phase 1 of the grand bargain. Now it's not going to be easy. Trump and Netanyahu are still going to try and push for a regime change in Iran. I think they fundamentally believe that that's the right plan. I think it's a terrible plan, but I think that's what they're. And shifting the narrative a little bit, because I can see the comments coming through there about Europe shifting to Europe now. Europe doesn't matter. Europe is on the verge of a sovereign debt crisis that's, you know, going to blow up the world. The Atlanticist order is being destroyed. It's fantastic. Exactly. There are still plenty of these snakes everywhere. They're in the Kremlin. Okay. They're positioned all through the European leadership. Merkel is being challenged fundamentally. She's going to be I think she's going to be out of power probably within 6 months. Now, I think she's going to be mortally wounded to the point where she's not going to be able to survive it. So, of course, Trump should listen to Lee Stranahan about Ukraine and the Chalupa clan and all of that stuff. Of course, he should listen to it. Wouldn't even doubt that he hasn't listened to it. The question is, how does he react to it? What way does he go about it? So we'll see. I think everything changes. I think Trump is setting up now for a major foreign policy win to broker some form of peace with the Russians. You might even see him come out and say something along the lines of, there's no reason why we can't. That I don't agree with how it was done, but there's no point in not recognizing that Crimea is part of Russia at this point because it's reality. Could you imagine the outcry? I think he would do it just to watch the meltdown. I mean, he's practically already said it. So here's a question that I'm not sure I can answer, user 13. So she says, do we see open warfare between the Euros and the migrants after Merkel's fall, or will the migrants simply take their benefits and go back where they came from? I don't know. I think Assad was, okay, speaking as far as Syrians are concerned, Assad came out, was quoted, gave an interview recently, said recently in the press that it's time for us to come together and start rebuilding Syria so Syrians can come home. Okay, it's time to end this nonsense and this positioning and all of this realpolitik and all this wrangling, because there's a real cost here, and the real cost has been borne by Syrians. And this policy is ending, and it's almost like he's saying, look, you guys have lost. Now can we start the rebuilding process so that the people can go back to their homes and they go back to their lives? And it's hard to continue justifying staying in Syria under those when that's becoming the narrative now, right? When we're now the migrant crisis in Europe, now people are, we're now starting to have world leaders talk about what the impetus for this, what the underlying cause of all of these people being, displaced across North Africa and the Middle East. Now people are actually looking at cause and effect, as opposed to just going, as opposed to just reacting to the thing in the moment and then, abreacting about the humanitarian crisis. Now we have to deal with that now because there are people who are dying and no. We have to always think about where this stuff came from. We always have to think about cause and effect. Is there any way to get the migrants to go home without ending the welfare state? Some of them will go home. Many of them won't. I mean, depends on how you define migrants, right? I live here in Florida, and I can tell you that, migrant Mexican labor here in Florida does a bang up job. They work really hard, and they send most of their money home. Documented, undocumented, whatever, that's not the issue at this point. Those people are not the problem. And if they had opportunities back home, they would go home. And so looking at the changes at the leadership level for all of these major sources of chaos, these major failed states around the world, Mexico being one of them, Syria, Ukraine, these were all created by U.S. meddling around the world and shit we shouldn't have been involved in. I don't know. I think WDM, if Trump says something about Crimea, I think it would actually exacerbate the open wound and force the EU to own up to their policy, because they put the sanctions on at the behest of the United States. Officially as at the behest of the United States. The United States said jump, and the EU said how high. Well, the truth of the matter is that they're all freaking globalists who put these things in place. It was one big club, and now we're not in the club, but they still want to be in the club, right? So yeah, I mean, there are many. There's fixes to the immigration issue. Yeah, no, Crimea is not negotiable. We know it's a done deal. My point is that Trump may use it as another way to twist the knife on Merkel and the EU and the left here in the United States, and the never Trumpers and the neocons, to further distance himself from these people, to further drive them crazy, right? To further drive them away from the path of peace, which is what we all want. Which means that he resonates more with the center of remember, this is all about positioning to get the center of the country, right? Because the center of the country is going to decide whether or not he is able to get a real majority in the Senate out of the midterms, right? Remember, we're sitting here like 52-47 in favor of the Democrats right now, because at least 5 Republican senators will vote with the Democrats on just about any issue that matters, like, you know, Lindsey Graham and John McCain and Murkowski and Collins and the rest of them, right? So we've lost Jeff Sessions' seat, so it's even worse than it was before. Orrin Hatch is retiring. He's going to be replaced by Romney, so we're already down 2 seats in that respect. In order for Trump to get a majority in the Senate, he's got to pick up 8 real seats. Or 6 or 7 real seats. And he's got a shot at doing that. I think Green Penguin, user 13, I think Green Penguin was talking about the European welfare state, not necessarily ours. I know we're all kind of focused on U.S. Does the House look shaky to me? No. I think it's going to be even more of a blowout than ever before. I honestly do. I think the Democrats are imploding. I mean, in a way that we could only dream of. They are collapsing like the major democratic socialist parties in Europe are collapsing. I mean, they really are. Tom Perez, God bless him, he is doing yeoman's work to ensure that Trump gets reelected in 2020. That know nothing from Westchester County, Ocasio-Cortez is the future of the Democratic Party. Okay, white people need not apply. The Democratic Party is done. It's unprecedented collapse. The trend is unbelievably clear. If you read Martin Armstrong regularly, he puts up the basic chart of the Democratic Party share of government in the House and the Senate since they peaked in World War II. They've been in a bear market ever since then. We just haven't had the collapse yet. It's coming. The welfare state is the root of all of the evil in the U.S. and the USA. Just look what the welfare. The welfare state's terrible. And you can't have open borders with a welfare state and a warfare state. Yep. It's going to be wonderful to watch. Just wonderful to watch. It needs to be done. It needs to happen. The collapse of socialism in politics as the dominant political paradigm of the age has to happen. It's going to happen. It's not a collapse of capitalism. Marx was wrong. The Austrians and the libertarians will be proven right. We won't usher in libertopia or anything. We're going to move 10-15% to the center right. But what's going to happen, what's going to be rejected is bigness. I haven't talked about this in a while. I don't like bigness. I don't like things that are big. Nature doesn't particularly like things that are big either. Nature tends to grind big things down into small things. Because big is unwieldy. Big is unresponsive. Big can't survive. Large animals are harder to you know, I mean, it's in every way. Bigness is hard to deal with. It's better to have a neural network and a distributed neural network of small things than it is to have one large thing bounding around. And I'm telling you that the big oligarchic moves to big government over. It's collapsing under its own weight. Can't sustain itself. And we're going to have if we have a libertarian revolution in the West, it will come from the perspective of us. I think it'll come from the millennials, who are much more communitarian, but not necessarily more socialist than Gen X is. Oh, it'll absolutely work against big tech. Dude, the forces of the decentralization are everywhere. That's we could like shift into crypto if you really want to, but you know, I mean, you know, there's no point in talking about crypto right now until it's out of a bear market. I mean, other than, you know, you should be accumulating good assets at, you know, at stink bid prices. But, you know, the other thing is to figure out what are the best assets, and there's still a lot of shaking out to be done at this point. So, you know, I'm being very cautious about the crypto market at this point. I barely look at it at this point until I have an idea as to what's actually going to survive. What is the future of big in China? It's a good question, WDM. I mean, do you see how do you think I'll get back to WDM in just a second. How do you think Gen Z will play out? They'll be more conservative than we. If my daughter is any indication, socialists have a real problem on that. It's almost like I was reading Anti-Fragile. I haven't read Anti-Fragile, but I mean, but I mean, I get the ideas. It's not that don't get me wrong. I've read some of Talib's stuff, but you know, these aren't hard ideas to come across. I mean, I'm sure he's done a much better job of laying out the argument than I have here in a very quick manner. But bigness is just unsustainable. Decentralization, as a libertarian and as an Austrian economist, you always argue for the atomization of control down to the smallest political unit, which in our case is one person. And when you truly take that to heart and then start applying it everywhere, you come to realize that you want that when you really start to look at like the issues of corruption and the issues of taxation and all of these things, you realize that, you know, if you want a stable society, you have to have one that is capable of reacting quickly to stressors. Always. And you react quickly to stressors by keeping your political units as small as possible, so that the damage done by the centralization of power over a geographical unit is as small as possible, so you localize the problem or the infection or however you want to put it. It's no different than how the body deals with disease or anything else. It localizes the problem and then attacks it and kills it. Doesn't let it out. Same thing. And I look at socialism and collectivism the same way. It's like keep it in a small, contained area. Fantastic. How do I think of the future of big will play out in China? Getting back to WDM's question. China has a lot of issues because China's massively different population, massively different cultures. Same thing with the Russians. How have the Russians dealt with it? Look at the size of Russia. Russia gets away with it by simply having every federated republic truly autonomous in its way. You have to have a government that's connected to the community. Absolutely. The community has to always be able to overthrow its government very quickly. when the government becomes unresponsive. And having a strong central government is not, this Bismarckian idea of the nation state as the ultimate technological weapon is horseshit. It's just horseshit. It's playing out here, and it's playing out here in the end of the beginning of the 21st century. That it's all it's done is amplified the same problems that we had in the 19th century, in the 20th century, in the 18th century, every century previously, when things were small. Oh, look, we have empires. Those empires codify and roll up capital to themselves and confer benefits on themselves at the expense of everybody else, sucking up vast wealth and then eventually collapsing through the overproduction of credit. Because the overproduction of credit is what's necessary to keep the thing going. And and it's all a mass delusion. It's literally, we're living in a mass delusion that has to be like purged at the generational level. And I look at this stuff, I look at this stuff at the individual level, then I'll go all the way out to the species level. And, at the species level, we have to work out all these ideas on our own. The Swiss government is a collection of cantons, small towns and cities. Yes. But they have tremendous individual autonomy. And, the more I, study the Russian system, I'm not saying that the Russian system is perfect, because they're saddled with a terrible constitution that was written by Goldman Sachs. Right? Or, I'm being facetious, mostly facetious when I say that. But it's not too far from the truth. Right? The biggest thing that you'll hear is the fear you'll hear out of the political establishment here in the United States and the West about Putin now having the kind of legislative majority that he could lever to fundamentally augment the Russian Constitution, which would destroy the structures put in place that empower the opposition in the fifth column within Russia against Putin. Now, they of course spin it that he's evil, but you can also spin it the other way, which is that they're the ones trying to, control a foreign power from within. And yes, the Swiss are the most stable government in Europe. So, when I talk about this stuff, that I'm thinking long term, that like, for example, I don't think the United States has long for this life. I think everything ends, everything dies, but nothing ever ends. And the United States itself, in this current form, may not survive. Okay. Shouldn't be beholden to a flag. We shouldn't be beholden to a government. We should be beholden to the ideas that founded that government. We're a long way from that. And everything we talk about on this channel is about the after effects and about the terrible effects of having gotten away from the fundamental ideas that we were supposed to have celebrated on Tuesday or Wednesday. Co-opted even the Declaration of Independence to be a day where, it's all military marches and, yet another opportunity to glorify the military. About that. About guys with guns telling other guys with guns to fuck off. And we're sitting here in a society today where we're fully 15 to 20% of the population thinks that the Declaration of Independence is hate speech. What America are you trying to save? I don't mean to be harsh, but I mean to be harsh. But don't weep for it. It's your community that matters. It's your family that matters. It's the people that you interact with that matter. No worry that you can't, things change. It's hard, but things change. And if there's an irreconcilable difference coming between the left and the right in the United States, then hopefully it'll end nonviolently. I think the millennials will be okay with it ending nonviolently. I don't think Gen X will have any desire to fight a freaking civil war to hold this country together. I think they'll be like, fuck that. We're done. You guys fucking, you're out. You're done. Russia is far too reliant on Putin RB tools. I agree. And I think that's what he's got to work sincerely on over the course of the next 6 years. William, I agree with you. I think, Martin Armstrong says from his cycles work that the window for the United States to start breaking up opens up in around 2024. Believe it or not. It's only 6 years away. Now, what comes after Trump? Think about it. If the media has gotten to this point, if the Democrats if the opposition to Trump have gotten to this point where they're openly calling for insurrection against the sitting president, where they're openly plotting against the sitting president, where are we 6 years from now? After he's tried to pull this thing back from the brink, and he's pulled the empire back, and he's destroyed so many gravy trains. And you have an even bigger portion of the population who's flipped out crazy because they're crazed, foaming at the mouth ideologues. I have been to Ohio. I have family in Ohio. My wife's family is from Ohio. It's awful. Right. These lunatics will never have power again. But they may become a regional party. Or they may become regional enclaves that we don't. I mean, dude, why would you want? I don't even understand why anybody. I know there are people from California who live, who work, who follow this. I know there are people from New York who follow this. But dude, seriously. No, I'm not talking about upstate New York. Upstate New York is mostly Republican, and even the Democrats are conservatives. It's down south. Like, New York City can just be its own fucking state, for Christ's sake. Kick these people out. Let them be their own country. Fuck them. Stop making them be a drain on the rest of us. Same thing with California. Same thing with parts of California. Not all of California, but not all Californians, obviously. They want to live like this. Let them be that way. Let them go. We here in Florida don't have nothing. We don't have any need for them. You think 8 to 10 years from now, you project out, cryptos 8 to 10 years from now, do you really think we could be talking about national debt-based currencies the way we're talking about them now? Do you think that there should be such a need for things like current account deficits and trade deficits and all of this other economic gobbledygook, none of which means a fucking thing in a real economy? It's all made up bullshit. That's what I argue with cynical skeptic about. It's like, when you stop, you're arguing about the way these countries argue with each other about the values of their currencies and these trade deficits versus trade surpluses. It's irrelevant. Currency just moves places, and then when it becomes too expensive, it cycles back in the other direction, and it's at the extremes when everybody gets crazy and starts lobbying their friggin' politicians to protect them. And then the politicians protect them, and then they fuck everything up. I agree with you, William. 6 years from now, everything is going to be a lot better. And, I don't mean this. When I say things like this, I'm not saying it from the perspective of not being a quote unquote patriot. I believe in the ideals of America. I don't believe America lives up to those ideals anymore. And I don't believe that we can live up to that. We need to have the current United States in its current form to live up to those ideals, even if, as a nation, we decide we want to live up to those ideals again, which for a long time we haven't. What's the point? Having a monolithic, what's the benefit of having a monolithic 50-state union? Oh, that I can drive from here to Montana without having to cross a customs zone or a border? Like, how much of a border is there going to be between one side of the Mississippi and the other? If, Kansas and Missouri are two different countries. Not that that's a likely demarcation line, but let's just say, seriously. Up until very recently, when we created a friggin' war on terror for no fucking good reason and destroyed border security and everything else, like Canada, just drive across the border. You need to show your fucking passport to go to Canada. Ew. Now we live in an open police state. An hour. I'm good. I'm off the rails. Getting tired. I should probably stop. If you guys enjoyed it, that's great. Do me a favor, give it a like, and a share. Get it out as much as possible. I'll post this up on the blog in the morning. I will probably be on a little bit on Sunday morning because I'm sure there'll be nothing to talk about other than I'm sure I'll be on Sunday morning just to talk about the World Cup semifinals. I didn't have a chance to watch either game today. I'm going to download them now and watch them later. And then I'm going to try and watch the Russia game live tomorrow. And because that would just be awesome. So I don't want to have that discussion about the hollowing out of factory workers and all of that from the perspective, because there's so much of that was based on managed trade and the very government interventions into the marketplace, which destroyed all of it. So it's a very complicated thing. I feel for everybody I feel for all of it. But I didn't have a chance to watch the game, but I did see the results. So I'm looking forward to watching it, because especially after I don't know if you guys saw the Belgium-Japan game. By far, up to this point, by far the best game played, and I mean that from a skill perspective and from a sportsmanship perspective, of the entire tournament. Japan and Belgium went at each other and threw everything they had at each other cleanly for 96 minutes. It was amazing. And you wish every friggin' match looked like it. But the truth of the matter is that they don't. England-Colombia wasn't bad, but it was way too chippy. But Belgium-Japan, to me, is like the high point of the tournament in terms of sportsmanship, skill, strategy, tactics, execution, but especially sportsmanship. Belgium-France should be fun. Haven't watched the French play yet, so it should be fun. But all right. But yeah, I'll probably be on for a bit on Sunday morning. We'll chat about the World Cup for a bit, and we'll chat about whatever, nothing that happened over the course of the last 2 days, because God forbid, nothing ever happened. All right, you guys take care. You have a great night. We'll talk soon. Keep your stick on the ice.